Hello everyone and welcome to the Gunpla Network. I'm the Spicer and today we'll be taking a look at the 2020 Master Grade GN-003 Kyrios, the successor to 2019's Master Grade Dynamis and the predecessor to the new Master Grade Virtue. This high-flying mobile suit does have a transformation that we'll take a look at, but before we get to any of the details, let's thank today's sponsor. This kit was provided to us by Canadian Gundam. Canadian Gundam is your one-stop shop for all your Gunpla and plamo needs here in North America. With a private warehouse option, a vast catalog, and flat-rate shipping to the US and Canada, they've got you covered on pretty much anything you'll need. When you're checking out that vast catalog and placing your next order, don't forget to use the promo code Gunpla Network to save 10% off. Now before we get into the nitty gritty, I do want to say overall this was a very enjoyable kit, much like the Dynamis before it. The inner frame is just a little different, but overall a lot of the same parts, so if you liked the Master Grade Dynamis' stability, you're going to get a lot of the same stuff here. There are some finicky pieces that are unique to the Kyrios for its transformation, but nothing is too ridiculous, and mostly my irritation, a very, very small amount of irritation, comes from the back skirts and how the beam sabers plug in. But all that aside, very nice. But let me tell you why. Now, of course, we have to start on the inside of the mobile suit with the inner frame, and pretty solid inner frame. A little different than the Dynamis, like I said, but uses a lot of the same armor parts that hold together the inner frame, kind of, if I remember right, like the Dynamis. The legs are different enough that I don't remember the Dynamis having too much outer armor holding it together, but a lot of armor in the arms and legs is apparent in the inner frame. Not nearly as much as, say, something like a blue frame or a red frame, but is still a couple pieces in the shoulders and the forearms and such. Still very striking, looks nice, does look pretty empty, but if you did want to do like a half and half type setup, it actually looks kind of interesting. Now, you don't get a lot of the details that you would get on, say, some of the older like Seed Master Grades or anything of that nature, but if we take a look at the top here, we get the nice little cavity for the GN drive. It goes in there. You want to get one of the LED units, you can do that. I didn't get one, and I didn't opt to buy my own, as much as I might in the future. One of those things that having to turn it on and off is just not something I'm really looking forward to, so I'll probably leave it on my shelf as is, and I think it's going to look fine. But overall, not a lot of inner detail here, still looks fine and does provide a nice contrast to the armor pieces, but it's really a personal preference. It looks cool, it's there. If you want to do a half and half thing, you can do that, but it's definitely not really anything too special. The legs are slightly different, but kind of the same thing here. It's okay, there's not a lot of inner detailing that you're really going to want to show off, which I honestly think is fine. I think there's probably a few Master Grades that when Bandai's going through, putting a bunch of inner detail on the inner frame is fine, but the vast majority of kits are going to get that covered up, and it's kind of a shame. Like I mentioned this with the Master Grade Infinite Justice, that there's so much cool detailing there that you just don't get to see unless you're doing a half and half build or a custom or just a full inner frame, which isn't as striking. But I kind of prefer this, honestly. It's something all that armor is going to go on for most people, so why really put that extra time and effort in unless it's something that kind of deserves it, or something like a blue frame where a lot of that inner frame is going to get shown. And once you get the armor on, it looks pretty solid. The orange is definitely very striking. It's fairly minimal, so it's not too loud and in your face. I kind of do wish there was a little bit more, something that the successors to this and the Arios and the Harute did very well. But generally, the little bits of orange here are nice, little subtle details, little pops of color, if you will. The rest of the kit looks pretty solid. There are a couple of things that I think look a little wonky. The insides of the orange things on the shoulders, a little odd. Not too bad. It just looks like there's some gaps in there. Could be how I built it, but it looks like it's kind of a design thing. Some of the darker kind of gray, some of the black pieces on the back nub a little bit, but if you're careful, it's not too bad. I kind of nubbed them kind of bad a little bit. Stress the plastic, it's very evident, but other than that, everything looks pretty solid. Now, the Kyrios has been out for almost 2 years now. People have made comments of the silver sticker on the head. I think that's fine, honestly. I do kind of wish that was like a actual scoped colored thing, but that's fine. It's actually pretty reminiscent of the line art, so it's not all that terrible. But it just seems like a strange choice, but regardless, it's not really a big detractor visually speaking. I haven't had any problems with it peeling up, and if you really are bothered by it, you can absolutely throw some paint on there. Just find a sheet of green foil sticker and just cut it down if you need to. Now, in terms of the details, kind of going from the top to the bottom, head, like I said, looks fine. The little cuts for the inner frame popping out look real cool on the sides of the face. You, of course, have the green GN condenser pieces there, and the GN ribbon on top of the head. The little yellow fin in the back is pretty cool. I do have to say this is one of the more unique head sculpts we have in Gundam. As we move to the shoulders and the chest, we get a little splash of orange here and there. On the back of the shoulders, it's not too bad. It's just one of those things I wish the shoulders had a little bit more orange in them, but that's a personal preference, nothing against the kit itself. The chest looks fine. The orange has some nice little paneling opportunities to help break it up and have a nice little contrast there. The inner fins, or the inner cavity parts, do move out, but they do bump into the shoulder pieces, so you do have to pull the shoulders out a little bit and then move those open if you decide to do so. Now, front skirts are pretty good looking. I do have some issues with them popping off from time to time, but they're not that bad. I've only had them pop off once or twice while posing this around, so not a huge problem from an actual moving standpoint, but visually there's no problems at all. The legs, once again, pretty fine. I think the big fins on the legs look good in this form. I don't think they look as good in the transformation, which I think might be a part of a kit issue versus a design issue, but we'll talk about that when I get to the transformation itself. Now, you will, of course, notice I also happen to be missing one of the ankle guards, and I have no idea how that happened. I do very vividly remember cutting them out, because I cut them out much earlier on in the process of building this kit, and I was like, oh, I cut out the wrong part for some reason, because I was just looking at the wrong plate, I guess. And only found one of them. Don't know where the other one went, so that kind of sucks, but oh well. It has its partner on the other side, so you have an idea of what it looks like. But yeah, I just lost that piece, so my bad, guys. You do get little splashes of orange on the feet as well, and they have those pretty standard 00 feet that are very strange and kind of hollow, but they do look pretty cool, I will have to say. Now, of course, didn't talk about the back. The back, a little bit more orange, like I said, on the shoulders. You get more of that. You have the big little beak piece for the transformation sticking out. That looks fine. The back skirts look fine. Not so much in practice in terms of moving them around and how the beam sabers fit in, but like I said, that's something we'll talk about with movement. But generally outside of that, not too much to write home about. I will say the back of the legs, having a big piece of inner frame gray sticking out there, I think actually looks really nice. Helps break up the white of the leg, something the Dynamis, I wouldn't say has a problem with, but is just more comfortable with having more of an armor, and this I think has a little bit more variation in terms of where it has things sticking out. So just visually a nice little cue. Now in the transformation, it looks pretty okay. I'm not gonna lie. Like I've said in the past, I'm not a huge transformation guy to begin with, and I don't really have anything posed in its Wave Rider form if it does have a transformation, but this is pretty stable and it looks good. So, it's what it is. It's a pretty simple, straightforward transformation. I do have to say the legs on this aren't a problem. I just think they look wonky, and this is my personal preference on transformations like this. I think stuff like the Age 2, where the legs pretty much just kind of fold up a little bit and stay there, like the Wing and the Wing Zero have a very similar transformation. This, since the legs kind of pop out to the side a little bit, it is a little more difficult to get them in place and looking right. And then the way the fins pop down, I don't think looks bad, just looks a little wonky again. It's definitely not the most jet-like, and after coming off of something like the high-grade Murasame that is very jet-like, It just feels a little weird, and just for whatever reason, I'm stuck on the fins not looking like wings. Once again, very much a personal preference, but that's really the only thing I'd have to say visually speaking about this kit that kind of throws me off a little bit. Everything else is in place, it looks fine, and generally very true to the line art, and very nice representation in plastic. Now, outside of the visuals, the transformation itself is actually pretty solid. There's not a lot to write home about. It's a couple pages in the manual if you want to follow the instructions, but it's all pretty straightforward. I will say the hips on mine are very tight, so moving them around is a little difficult, a little, I wouldn't say problematic. It doesn't feel like it's going to break necessarily, but there's a lot of resistance there. The back skirt, for whatever reason, likes to get in the way and pop off. I've only tried the transformation about 2 times, just kind of back and forth, and both times I've had the back skirt pop off. So just kind of keep that in mind. It could just be mine, because it's not happened on both sides. It's only the right side. Yeah, the right side back skirt popping off. Don't know why. Just does that. Could be the way I'm moving it. Could just be the joint is weak. But it's a pretty tight ball joint, so I don't really know as to why it does that. But that's neither here nor there. The legs work fine. Be careful with the fins on the knees. I haven't had mine break or stress or anything, but it does take a fair amount of force to pop them out and push them down. Outside of that, looks pretty good. You can attach the shield, rifle, missile pods, whatever you really want in terms of accessories to it for different loadouts, if you will, but it's pretty much just going to stay in Wave Rider mode. You're not doing a whole lot of posing in this form, but it still looks nice. Now, once we get into mobile suit mode, you have a lot more posing options. I will say that a static pose like this is still going to stand out more so than something like the Dynamis. The Dynamis is a darker hunter green and bulkier looking, not by a whole lot, but the shoulder shields do help with that quite a bit, and blends in more to the background of a shelf. So if you put it behind something, it's going to kind of just blend into the tapestry of your display versus trying to stick out like what the Kyrios is going to do with that bright orange. Now, even if you have it just standing kind of in the back, it's going to be at least noticeable. It's not going to be like a sore thumb or anything of that nature, but even in a static pose, you're going to get some very interesting visuals. Now, if you do decide to go more dynamic, put in some action poses, or say pop it up on a stand where it really shines, really wish this kit would have come with a display stand since it's transforming, but it didn't, which is a little disappointing, but neither here nor there. If you pick a stand up, pop it on there, it's going to quite literally fly. It's great, it's amazing. So, popping on the beam rifle looks pretty solid. I will say, much like the Dynamis, it has I wouldn't say an issue, just an extra step in posing because of that extra articulation in the wrist and forearm. It does make it a little more difficult to get the model kit to look down the barrel or down the sight. Not impossible, and just takes a little bit extra thought to kind of just adjust where the arm and the wrist are and a little bit on how the head is posed, but you can absolutely do it and it looks good. Very cool looking rifle. I will say I think I maybe built mine wrong because the visor, the scope does not stick in place. It just falls down into the kind of body of the rifle. It doesn't fall down too far, so I don't know if maybe that's on purpose since it's designed to hang upside down in the Wave Rider mode, but it is there, just kind of something. If you build it, maybe that's just kind of normal. Not 100% sure on that, but it looks fine. It doesn't affect how it poses in this form, just something to kind of keep in the top of your head. One of the neat kind of gimmicks, if you will, of this kit is the little actual triggers pop off. It's not actually attached to, like, it's not physically a part of the beam rifle. So the Kyrios can use it for other things, kind of like a remote control, if you will. And you can use it for the missile pods, like we see here. Kind of going back to the Kyrios blowing up the Human Reform League Super Soldier Labs. Absolutely pull off that pose, not too difficult. You have 2 of the cool big missile pods that go on the sides. And if you want, you can absolutely have those just on the sides of the forearms with the beam rifle sitting there, the shield on the back of the arm, and a beam saber in hand if you really want to go all out. I think these look cool. This is a nice little inclusion. Definitely maybe not the main pose people are going to go with, but one that I think a lot of people would want to replicate at some point in owning this model kit. Now, the beam sabers, I actually do have to say I think I like this look the best of anything on this kit. It looks so dynamic and aggressive. It really gives you a cool, different sense than what you got with the Dynamis or what you're going to get with the Virtue most likely, unless you're posing it in like the Nautilite form and going beam sabers as well. It just looks like it's fast, right? It looks like it's rushing in, slicing stuff up, and it looks really cool. It's a very neat melee-centric look that even I don't think the Exia goes too far into. I think it is part of the sharper dimensions of this kit versus the Exia kind of being a little more rounded, the Dynamis being a little flatter, and kind of the same thing with the Virtue being very big and bulky. This just looks like it was meant to dual wield beam sabers. It looks so cool. Like, by far my favorite. You can get them in a couple of cool poses, kind of a like flying static standing pose with both beam sabers down, kind of slashing or running forward. You can kind of do the Kiriyamato special with one forward, one back, or if you want to go Star Wars, you can absolutely go Ahsoka on that kind of double wielded, one forward facing, one on the offhand backwards facing. Still cool looking, really like it. By far, I think my favorite visuals here, but even on the Dynamis, I really liked the beam saber, so that's probably just a personal preference there. Now, of course, I would be crazy to not mention the weird crab claw shield thing. It's neat. I don't think this is the best execution of it, probably. I mean, I've never tried the high-grade variant of this, but this just feels a little weird. It pulls out and bends in a couple of different weird ways, which aren't inherently helpful to the posing. I mean, it's cool that it does it, I guess, just isn't all that beneficial, I feel like. The blade doesn't stick in super well. It's fine, just it's probably something that's going to fall out on you. I'm going to be 100% honest. I didn't pose this a lot with the shield just because I feel like the shield gets in the way a lot. Once again, personal preference. I just am not a huge fan of this shield, and I wasn't really a huge fan in the show. Even with the cool, like, grabbing and poking, stabbing scene we got with it towards the end, just not something that really left a mark on me. I think it's fine. I think it looks good. And someone who's a really big fan of an accessory like this will probably like all that extra articulation. I just feel like it's needlessly articulated for no real visual purpose. It doesn't help you pose it in a cool way. I'm sure if you have some like master grade GNXs, you can absolutely get some cool poses with it, but just like having it bend outwards feels very strange to me. Once again, personal preference, to each their own, I suppose. But kind of closing it out here with my overall thoughts, I think much like the Dynamis, with a little work, you're gonna really enjoy this. It is really stable, it's got some nice tight joints in there. You're not gonna feel like this thing is gonna get really floppy and loose and just not be able to hold a pose at any point. There's a nice variety in terms of your accessories and posability with the Wave Rider form, the missile pods, the beam rifle, the weird crab claw shield thingy, and of course the beam sabers, that you pretty much have anything you want from a kit like this. It's definitely a nice contrast to the Dynamis or the Virtue if you're wanting to kind of go by the anime's pairings, if you will, with the Virtue and Kyrios typically working together. I really kind of wish they would have had a big missile pod thing for this like we did see in the show. Not something I'm really all that concerned about. That would have just been a cool little extra. But I think it would have added more benefit to having it in Wave Rider mode, just because it's an extra cool accessory that you kind of have to use in that mode. But either way, very solid, both visually and in terms of usable posability. You've got quite a few cool poses to pick from. So overall, if you're a 00 fan, I think this is definitely a must get. If you're just a fan of master grades, I think there's enough unique pieces here that even if you've built the Dynamis, it's something to pick up in anticipation of the Virtue. But those are my thoughts. Of course, if you've built this and want to share your experience, let us know in the comments. And if you haven't and you have questions, please let us know. I will do my absolute best to answer them. Of course, friends, I've been the Spicer here for the Gunpla Network. Please do your best to stay safe and keep on building.